Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. And as we just said, I'm going to be discussing the changing face, so the evolution of the developer ecosystem. I'm not going to go too much into, or actually at all, into the metrics behind how to measure DevRel and so on. We've got plenty of that as well, but I think for today, the important thing is to understand developers. So before I actually go into the data I want to show you, just very quickly introducing ourselves so that you know where these data are coming from. So we're /data, we help the world understand developers, very happily so. We survey more than 30K developers annually, and based on that research, we understand who developers are, the sizing of the community, the segments, the tech decisions that they make, so what they buy, and where they're going next, so trends. Our clients include some of the big guys of the industry and others as well, just a small sample here. So what we do is that we run 2 surveys per year. As I said, we reach more than 30K developers in the process across more than 159 countries each time. We use more than 87 partners to do that, and these range for really small local meetups to really big vendor communities. So we're trying to get a whole range of communities out there to make sure that we have a representative sample, and the consistency of our results actually proves that we do. We researched 10 development areas, the ones that you see here on the left, so mobile, desktop, web, and so on. It's not 10 distinct developer groups, of course. There's a huge overlap between these areas, as I'm going to show you. It's just 10 development areas. Okay, and with that out of the way, what we'll be discussing today. So I'd like to take you through the journey of the developer evolution. So in terms of the size of the community, how they have grown, the different sectors, how they have grown, emerging technologies, what developers are interested in, so a glimpse in the future perhaps, if the hype survives. Then tapping into the next generation, so developers now coming into the space, what are they after, what do they need, what sort of support? And then also the phenomenon of the non-developers. So as we have lowering barriers to entry, we have non-developers pouring in, and they're quite different, as I'm going to show you. All right, so let's start. So first of all, the dev community has grown spectacularly. We estimate that there are about 20.4 million developers at the end of 2019, and that constituted an increase of 30% as compared to the end of 2017. So plus 30% in 2 years. And even if we employ a rather conservative development growth model on this data, we predict that we will have at least 22 million developers by the end of 2020. So we estimate about 22 to 23 million developers. Now, how are they spread across the different development sectors that we are researching? Okay, so the first thing to note here is that if you try adding these numbers, the population numbers, they don't add up to 20.4 million. They add up to something a lot bigger than that. That's because, as I said, there's a huge overlap between these sectors, and developers are in fact, on average, in 2.6 sectors, each of them. 67% are in at least 2 of these, and 22% are in fact in 4+. So think of a developer that has a back end of the cloud, and then a front end in the web and mobile, and then an ML API to go with that. So that's 4 sectors already. All right, so the largest sector is web, and it's growing healthily there, close to the average of the whole population. We said that was 30%, so that's not annual growth, beware. That's the growth in 2 years from end of 17. But if you are to focus on one sector here, that would be ML. As you can see, it has grown by 46%, in 2 years, and has climbed to the 4th position here. And it's really close to mobile, and mobile is not growing anywhere near as fast. So we do expect it to overtake mobile pretty soon, if it hasn't already. And so other and this is growing, and then we have backend, of course, that is behind all the evolution in cloud technologies, is behind all the boom that we see, one of the key factors. And backend is also growing quite a lot, the second biggest at the moment. So, and there are, of course, the other sectors trailing behind for now. Okay, so these are, let's say, the more established areas, but we also have some more emerging sectors, and developers are getting into them. So if you want to understand how the face of the ecosystem will change, you need to understand which ones are more likely, of these are more likely to be adopted versus abandoned in the future. So here we're showing you, so what we measured in our survey is which technologies of the trending or hyped one, let's say, are developers actively working on, learning about, interested in, or they don't care about them the least. So here we're showing you interest. Interested is anyone who is at least interested in technology or otherwise learning or using it. So it's the sum of these three: using, learning, interested in. And then we have adoption here on the map. So of course, the number one thing is DevOps, that at the right-hand corner there. It has been growing really steeply. Currently, 1 in 3 developers worldwide have an active interest, which means they're actually using DevOps or they're actively learning about it, not simply just interested in it, actively interested in it. They're doing something about it. 1 in 3 is quite a lot. Computer vision is also something to watch. The same active interest percentage in this case is 20%. So 1 in 5 is doing something with computer vision, either using it already or learning about it. So these are the two here, and we expect them to stay there. I can go over each one of these, unfortunately, but just one more I want you to look at is Fog Edge at the bottom left. It is currently at the bottom left, but it has far more potential than any of its more sci-fi cousins there of self-driving cars and quantum computing. And the reason is that it's what we call infrastructural technology. And it has grown from just 5% actively interested in it 2 years ago to 9%. So it's nearly doubled. It has nearly doubled, 18%. So we really expect it to be moving up the scale here in the future. So this is where we're going in terms of technologies. Now, one key thing that is happening in terms of the developer ecosystem is developers moving into the so-called vertical industries. So we see a slight decrease here on the left as to how many these are professional developers, are into their natural habitat of software products. It has stabilized actually, but it's just below 50%. While on the right, we have just handpicked a few industries, we track a lot more obviously, that are on the rise. So health, medical, financial services, data analytics, they have seen a big increase. The cloud technology is behind that mostly, but also other things like payment APIs for financial services that suddenly gives the financial institutions the option to reach out to a wider audience, so they employ developers or create an ecosystem of developers around their services. Health, medical, all the ML algorithms, for example, for diagnostic reasons. So there are many factors behind that, but they're going into, which means they're being employed there. So there's a demand. It's not just a matter of developers wanting to move over, which is also happening, but there is obviously demand in the vertical industries now, and it's growing. All right, and while they're going into those industries, and in the software industry as well, obviously, developers are decision makers. We find that 71% are somehow making or involved in tooling decisions, right? Only 21.9% are not. And even if we put aside that gray bar there, so those who are buying something for their own use, you see there's a huge overlap here because many people are doing both. They're buying something for their own use, that's fine. But what we're mostly interested here is all the blue bit here that says that developers in organizations mostly are at least influencing decisions. So you see nearly half, 45%, identify themselves as influencers. And we have at least 20%, the bottom 3 bars there's overlap, but there's above 20%, obviously, that make the decision, the final decision, or improve expenses or team budgets. So when you're talking to a developer, there's a 70% chance that you're talking to a decision maker. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Now, another way in which you would like to see how an ecosystem is evolving is who is coming into it. So there are two things I want to discuss on this topic. One is the young coming into the ecosystem, so the next generation of developers, and then we'll discuss non-developers. So first, the next generation. First of all, right now, 30%, so 1 in 3, nearly 1 in 3 developers currently are under the age of 25. Okay, so you need to know what they're into, what they're interested in, because they are a big chunk of the ecosystem. Now, a few things about them is that they tend to jump into the emerging sectors. So what I'm showing you here is the age distribution in some of the sectors we're tracking. And as you can see, machine learning here is at the top, followed by VR and AR games as well, but that was always the case with enthusiasts building games. But ML, VR, and AR are attracting a quite young audience. So if you are in these sectors, bear in mind that about 40% of your audience are under the age of 25, as opposed to backend, for example, or industrial IoT, where you get the older, won't say old, older, or therefore also perhaps more experienced. It is also more experienced based on our data. So this is one thing to note. So whether or not, however, they will stay in these sectors so much, but they will always have the experience on them. So it remains to be seen whether this distribution will remain as is as we go. Also, there's I'm not showing it here, but there's an age and region connection here. We have many new developer communities coming from the East mostly, and also Africa, who are leapfrogging directly into the exciting and emerging sectors. So if we look at the regional breakdown of that, is actually even more pronounced, the age distribution, the mix, the percentage of young people. Now, young people have different needs and different perception of things. So we also ask about open source. We know that nearly all developers use open source. The question is who contributes? So here you see that actually that is correlated to age. So the younger developers tend to contribute more to open source than their older peers. Why do people contribute? So these are just 4 of the reasons that we track. And you can see that to improve my coding skills, the green line there goes down with age, as does fun, unfortunately. And so the younger into it, they contribute, not use, contribute, to improve their skills and to have fun. They also, and that is the key here, I think, for this audience, is that it makes them feel they belong somewhere. So it's the sense of community that has been intensified through open source. And we have seen that companies that have, jumped on the train and tried to build a community around open source or support existing communities are doing really well. So there's certainly something to keep in mind. Now, just one more note on open source, exactly because it's so crucial. And open source is one way in which the face of the ecosystem has changed. It was there before, but it's becoming more and more relevant and more into everything. So this is just 4 key numbers to remember as to how much developers care about open source. So whether they contribute or not, 76% of all developers expect vendor support for open source. And actually 38% in particular expect support to the open source communities, right? So to support a community. Contributors have stronger views, as you might expect. So you have nearly half contributors expecting you to support their open source community. So that's also something that is a big change, big trend in the area. Now, going back to the youngsters, so again, if you're addressing their needs, if you're in an emerging sector or in a region that has many young developers, it's good to know that it helps to know that they have different perception of of the support. So what a developer program offers. This is just some of the attributes of a program that I'm showing you here, just to demonstrate my point that the younger developers, so the under 25, so the green columns here, expect something different from you. Of course, documentation and sample code remains their number one priority. It's what we call hygiene factor, but they care less about it as opposed to their older peers. And they also care less about, you say, right, they are young, they are learners, most likely. So let's give them tutorials, let's give them webinars. Well, you know what? They have a quite different way of learning. Yes, they will appreciate tutorials and webinars, but they want hackathons, they want meetups, and so on, not so much technical support. So we will be tracking this to see how this changes as the ecosystem evolves, how the overall popularity of the so-called mainstream ways to support developers evolves over time as this generation ages. I mean, will they get out of hackathons? Yes, maybe, but will they get into the less mainstream ways of learning other than just tutorials and webinars? It remains to be seen. But for now, if you are in a sector that is emerging, bear in mind, they have different needs. Now, as I said, there's a different way in which the ecosystem is changing. It's not just the new generation, it's also the non-developers. So as the barriers to entry were lowered, because we have all these APIs and all these automations, and suddenly, hey, anyone can code, right? Anyone can build something. So we have the non-developers jumping in, and they're going first into the emerging sector. So here I'm giving you the example of AR, VR. So we are in the process of sizing actually the non-developer community, more on this in a few months actually. But for now, I'll show you how they are different from the developers in the space. And therefore they need a different approach when building community for them. So these are the motivations for both developers and non-developers in AR and VR. We have found again and again that motivations are very, very strongly correlated to the technology choices that developers make. So their choices are driven by their motivations. And there are some really interesting differences here. One is that developers, the most popular answer there is that they're getting into AR, VR to gain experience. So they're learning in order to maximize future opportunities. Non-developers have less than that percentage, less than half that percentage, 15% say so. So they're not into it just to learn, they're doing something already. And what are they doing? So they're doing far more than their developer friends. They care about increasing organizational efficiency or reducing cost. If you think, how do you do that through AR, VR? Well, that could be many different ways. In retail, you may be building an application to be showcasing your product, and that's if you don't need perhaps a salesperson or that many branches because of that reason, hence their cost reduction, right? So they're into it for a reason. They're even less into it for fun. If you see, it's 20 versus 25. Therefore, one key thing to remember for this group is that you have to figure out what they're trying to do. And it's not fun. It's not just art. It's not just something like that. I mean, in the fun way. It could be very well professional art. So that's one thing that they have in difference. So we also check what kind of technologies they use and what kind of applications they're trying to build. And there are differences again compared to developers. So first of all, you see that they use 3D animation software more and game engines far less. So they're not into it for the games. They're not building games, right? And that also shows on the right here on type of apps that they're building. Games and toys is quite lower. So 3D animation, and they're building more entertainment stuff. Again, this is not for fun. That's their profession, mostly. So they are different in that way. And now, finally, one more thing in which they're different is that they don't code so much. Obviously, they're non-developers, right? Are they interested? So would you be right to assume that the minute they step into this space, they'll try to code? Well, not really. Half of them will not. So here, the gray dotted line shows you up to the point. So we asked them if they code, if they have any programming experience. And nearly half there says that, nope, I don't know, or something very limited, or I may occasionally do it, so they're not that interested in coding. So if you're thinking training them on how to code so that they may use your functionality, your product, think again, for half of these people, this is irrelevant information. So instead, you should try and see how, on the one hand, you should figure out what they're trying to do, which is not, as we said, for fun in most cases, and what's there for their use case there, for AR, VR in this case, and perhaps offer them the tools and no-code tools to do it, right? Instead of trying to support them to train. So any community resources in this case for this community will have to be related to figuring out how to use in order for their use case, rather than supporting them on learning to code. You can do that as well. You can see that 22% are trying to code, but the emphasis in our view should not be there. Okay, so that's it. 6 takeaways, therefore, out of what I just showed you. One is that the community is growing really fast, 30% in 2 years, and we expect the number of developers to surpass 20 million by the end of 2020. The second is the technologies that are coming in really fast and to watch for are few. We're just handpicking 3 here: DevOps, computer vision, and Fog Edge. Developers are influencers. 70% are somehow involved in tooling buying decisions. Now, the next generation coming in is more into emerging sectors and contributes to open source more. So open source is a big thing, and you should be supporting it if you're not already. And the next generation also learns in a different way. And we're waiting to see whether those ways will become more mainstream as a result going forward. And then we have the non-developers pouring into the tech world as the barriers to entry are lowered, and they have different motivations. They use some technologies more and some less as compared to developers, and they have limited coding skills, and they need a different approach. Their community, if you are to support them and guide them through this space, they need a different approach than what you employ for developers. And that's it.